Have you ever heard of a dog who vanished for years, only to return when his partner needed him most? This is the story of a sheriff, a boy running from shadows, and a scarred German shepherd who refused to give up. It's a tale of loyalty, danger, and a fight for family in the lonely deserts of America. But before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below. I'd love to see how far this story travels. And wherever you are, I hope this day brings you peace, strength, and a little bit of light. The desert around Red Hollow, Arizona, stretched out beneath the first light of dawn, a vast expanse of ochre soil and cracked stones scattered with sagebrush. The storm that had torn through the night before had left its fingerprints in the land, branches snapped from cottonwoods, gullies carved through dirt, dust pressed into strange ripples as if the earth itself had trembled. The sky was a hard pale blue, streaked with silver clouds that moved reluctantly eastward, and the air carried that sharp, clean smell that comes after rain. Red Hollow was a town that most people only pass through, a forgotten edge of Arizona where the cell signals died and secrets lingered longer than visitors. In the middle of it all drove Sheriff Nathaniel Cross. Nathaniel was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that filled a room even when he said nothing. His hair, dark chestnut cut short, bore faint streaks of gray near the temples, reminders of both time and grief. His steel-gray eyes had seen too much for a man his age: loss of his wife to illness, betrayals in his line of duty, and the lingering ache of mistakes he told no one about. People in Red Hollow trusted him with their safety, admired his calm steadiness, but rarely invited him to dinner tables, for he carried a certain solitude like a second badge. His navy uniform was worn smooth at the seams, his star-shaped badge dulled around the edges, but he wore them with a kind of quiet dignity. Nathaniel leaned slightly forward in the driver's seat of his patrol truck, the window rolled down just enough to let the cold desert air sting his face. He preferred mornings like this, silent, unbroken, with nothing but the wind to answer his thoughts. His hands, calloused from years of both farm work in youth and law work in adulthood, tapped faintly against the steering wheel. For him, routine patrols were less about expectation and more about vigilance, like walking the fence line of a pasture you knew by heart, yet distrusted every inch of. It was a long Mosquito Trail, a forgotten dirt road curling at the town's edge, where the horizon shimmered under the waking sun, that Nathaniel saw it. At first it was only a shape, something swaying in the distance beneath the lone cottonwood tree, the only tree for miles, black against the red-gold sand. His stomach tightened. He slowed the truck, dust lifting in a cloud behind his wheels, eyes narrowing. At that distance, it looked almost like a body, a man strung up by cruel hands. But as he drew closer, the truth grew more brutal and more heartbreaking. It was a dog. Nathaniel stopped the truck so abruptly, the gravel crunched like glass under his tires. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the stillness, his boots pressing into damp soil. The wind had died. The birds circling above held their distance, as though nature itself waited. Hanging from the cottonwood by its hind legs was a German shepherd, body limp, fur, caked in dust and dried blood, the rope tied cruelly high on the branch. The dog swayed slightly as though mocking the morning's calm. Nathaniel's breath caught. He approached slowly, one hand raised as though to calm a wild creature, whispering low, despite knowing the dog likely could not hear. The closer he came, the sharper the image burned into his eyes. The shepherd's chest rose in shallow, ragged breaths, proof of life, clinging desperately. Its left ear was folded permanently downward, an odd bend like an old wound. Scars ran across its ribs like ancient battle lines. And when its eyes, half closed and filled with exhaustion, flicked open for a heartbeat, there was something in them, a spark of recognition that hit Nathaniel like a blow. His heart slammed against his ribs. He knew that ear, that scar, that gaze. It could not be, yet it was. Valor, his partner, his German Shepherd K9 who had vanished 2 years ago during a failed raid against a cartel in Elmore County. They had searched until their voices cracked, until dust filled their lungs and hope bled dry. The department had held a memorial, placed a photograph with flowers, declared him gone. Nathaniel had stood at the back of that service, silent, unable to speak the eulogy expected of him. He had not been able to bury the idea that maybe, just maybe, Valor had not died, but was out there alone. Now, impossibly, the truth swayed before him, half dead, yet still breathing. Nathaniel's knife was in his hand before he realized he'd drawn it. His fingers trembled as he reached upward, cutting the rope in 2 quick strokes. The body fell heavy into his arms like sandbags, dead weight yet faintly warm. He knelt on the wet dirt, cradling the shepherd against him, whispering hoarsely, "I've got you, boy. You're safe now. You're safe." Valor stirred weakly, his paw twitching against Nathaniel's wrist. Up close, the damage was clearer. Pads raw and cracked, nails split, fur matted into clumps, ribs showing through the sable coat. And yet, even in ruin, the dog lived. Nathaniel pressed his forehead against Valor's, feeling the faint breath wheeze against his skin. His voice broke in a way it hadn't in years. "I thought I lost you." The shepherd answered with a sound, half a croak, half a bark, and let its paw fall again, too weak to do more. A voice startled him. "Well, I'll be damned." Nathaniel's head snapped up, his hand instinctively protective around Valor. Emerging over the ridge was a man, Hank Rohr, 68, a wiry rancher who had lived on the outskirts of Red Hollow all his life. Hank was tall and thin, with a wiry frame that carried a lifetime of hard work. His face was weathered like leather left under the sun too long, with a deep squint that came not only from desert glare, but also from suspicion of the world. A torn brown coat hung from his shoulders, dusty boots sunk into the dirt, and atop his head sat a battered fedora that hadn't left him since the Nixon years. He had a lever-action rifle slung casually over his shoulder, though his posture was calm. Hank had earned a reputation in town as a recluse, tending goats, smoking cigars that smelled sharp as turpentine, and knowing the desert's secrets better than anyone else. He had a rough humor like sandpaper, but behind it a strange integrity, the sort that made him unpredictable yet reliable. "Didn't mean to spook you," Hank said, stopping a few feet away. "Been watching you kneel over that dog for near 5 minutes. His voice rasped, dry as gravel. Nathaniel looked up warily, but relaxed slightly when he saw it was only Hank. "I know this dog," Nathaniel said. "Oh yeah?" Hank tilted his head. "He was mine, K9 unit, lost him 2 years ago." Hank whistled low, shaking his head. "Hell, that's a long time for a dog to be lost." "Or taken," Nathaniel muttered, the words bitter in his mouth. Hank rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "Saw a black SUV out here last night. No plates, parked by that tree for a while. Thought it was poachers. Didn't see no lights, then it drove off fast." Nathaniel stiffened. "Did you see them?" "Just shadows," Hank admitted. "But looks like they left you a gift." His eyes flicked toward Valor. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. He shifted, lifting Valor carefully into both arms. The shepherd didn't protest, too weak even to whimper, but his dark eyes remained locked on Nathaniel's face with a weary trust. "I need to get him back to town, see the vet." "Of course." Hank stepped back with respect, the rifle resting easily against his arm. "You come by later, I'll draw you a map. Maybe we can track them before the wind erases their trail." Nathaniel nodded, grateful but focused. "Thank you, Hank." He carried Valor to the truck, opened the back door, and laid him gently on a thick emergency blanket, tucking it beneath the shepherd's frame. He tilted a bottle of water, so droplets slid against Valor's cracked lips. The dog's tail twitched faintly. Nathaniel closed the door, sat behind the wheel, and glanced into the rearview mirror. "I've got you now," he whispered. The engine roared to life, and he steered the cruiser back toward Red Hollow. Behind them, the frayed rope swayed in the breeze from the cottonwood, whispering of cruelty and survival. The tires of Nathaniel's patrol truck groaned over the gravel as he pulled into Red Hollow's narrow main street, a stretch of faded storefronts and wooden porches that had endured decades of dust and silence. The storm had left its mark here too, broken signs dangling by one chain, trash blown against the steps of the diner, the whole town coated in a thin film of ochre grit. Nathaniel parked in front of the sheriff's substation, a squat one-story building with sun-bleached siding and a roof patched too many times. He stepped out of the truck, his body heavy, not from fatigue, but from the weight he carried in the back seat. When he opened the rear door, Valor blinked weakly at him, tail twitching in faint recognition. Nathaniel whispered, "We're here, buddy," and lifted him gently into his arms. Inside the substation, Deputy Clara Mayfield was the first to see them. Clara was 29, with a lean build and quick movements that spoke of someone always ready to act. Her pale skin was dotted with freckles across the bridge of her nose, and her strawberry blonde hair was pulled into a no-nonsense ponytail beneath her patrol cap. Her green eyes, sharp with focus, carried a faint scar above her left temple, the remnant of a foot pursuit that had gone wrong 2 years earlier when a suspect had knocked her into a steel fence. The injury had changed her, not her efficiency or her courage, but it had given her a quiet compassion, especially for anything vulnerable. She was known in the department as tough but tender when it came to animals. She carried herself with crisp authority, but her humor, often dry and sly, revealed warmth underneath. When Clara saw Valor draped in Nathaniel's arms, her clipboard slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "K9 Valor?" Her disbelief trembled with something more, grief undone by hope. Nathaniel gave a single nod. "He's alive, but he's hurt bad." Clara rushed ahead, opening the doors toward the small examination room where they sometimes kept injured strays before sending them to the vet. "Get Dr. Brooks," she called over her shoulder. Within minutes, Dr. Alden Brooks arrived. Alden was in his late 60s, tall but stooped from years bending over animals. His thinning silver hair was combed carefully, his glasses always sliding down the ridge of his nose. Though his voice often carried a grumble, his hands were gentle, hands that had delivered calves on ranches, stitched up feral cats, and eased the pain of more strays than he could count. He wore a faded plaid shirt under his lab coat, its elbows patched, and his boots tracked with dust. Alden had spent his whole life in Red Hollow, refusing offers to move to bigger towns, convinced that critters here need me more than those city ones do. He was pragmatic, direct, but soft-hearted beneath the gruff tone. He leaned over Valor, running gloved fingers over every rib, every scar, his brow furrowed deeper with each inch. "This dog's been through hell," he muttered. He pointed toward the abdomen, where faint scars lined the belly. "See this?" Surgical. Somebody cut him open, more than once, and not for kindness. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Clara's hand rested unconsciously on Valor's paw, as though to comfort him. "What does it mean?" she asked. Brooks shook his head. "Smuggling, likely. I've seen rumors. Cartels using dogs. Cut them open, sow contraband inside, treat them like nothing more than couriers." He sighed, pulling off his gloves. "But whoever did this, they wanted him alive. Barely. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sewn him back up." Nathaniel felt his stomach twist. He remembered the cartel raid, the storm of bullets, the moment Valor had vanished into chaos. Had they taken him then? Held him for 2 years? Used him again and again, like some soulless vessel? He bent lower, whispering near Valor's ear, "Not anymore. You're mine. You're safe." At that moment, the back door of the station opened and another sound entered, the quick patter of sneakers on the floor. Emily Cross, Nathaniel's 14-year-old niece, came running in. Emily had lived with Nathaniel since the car accident that had taken both her parents 3 years ago. She was slender, her frame still caught between childhood and adolescence, with long chestnut brown hair often falling into her face and gray-blue eyes that mirrored her uncle's in quiet intensity. Emily had always carried an air of distance, distrustful of the world for stealing her family. Though she loved Nathaniel in her way, she often thought of him as remote, more sheriff than uncle, a man who brought order to a town, but little warmth into their small wooden home. She had grown quiet, bookish, often spending her afternoons sketching by the window rather than speaking. Now, when she saw the battered shepherd lying on the table, her expression softened in a way Nathaniel had not seen in years. "Uncle Nate? Who is this?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel hesitated, then answered with a voice that carried reverence. "This is Valor. He was my partner." Emily approached slowly, her hand hovering over the dog's fur before resting gently. Valor's eyes opened faintly, and for the first time that morning, they flickered with something other than pain. Trust. Emily smiled through tears. "He's beautiful." Clara glanced at Nathaniel, noting the small shift in the girl's demeanor. Perhaps the dog was already doing what grief and time had not, building a bridge. Dr. Brooks continued his examination, applying ointment to the paws, wrapping the worst of the wounds. He'll need rest, good food, clean shelter. He's skin and bones, but the will is there. Some animals, they just don't give up. Nathaniel nodded. Then neither will I. As they worked, Nathaniel noticed Emily linger, near Valor, whispering soft things he could not quite hear. Something in his chest loosened. He had been worried for so long that he could not reach her, that she lived in a silence even he, who lived so comfortably in silence, could not break. Perhaps Valor could. When Brooks finally finished his immediate care, Clara helped Nathaniel move Valor into a makeshift kennel lined with blankets. The German shepherd curled weakly but settled, eyes half closed, yet watchful. Clara crossed her arms, her gaze flicking between Nathaniel and the dog. If the cartel had him, Nate, they won't just forget. Dogs like him. They're valuable to the wrong kind of people. Nathaniel met her eyes, the steel in his own returning. Then we make sure they never touch him again. Emily, hearing this, held Valor's paw gently. For the first time in months, she looked at her uncle with a faint smile, one that reached her tired eyes. The desert sun rose higher over Red Hollow the next morning, its light painting the town in a copper haze that made every shadow stretch longer than it should. Nathaniel Cross sat in his office at the sheriff's substation, his hat hung on a peg by the door, the stale smell of last night's coffee lingering. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Valor strung from that cottonwood, swaying like a broken flag. The shepherd lay now in the kennel room nearby, resting, his chest rising more evenly, though each breath carried the rasp of pain endured. Nathaniel rubbed his temples, already dreading the questions that needed answers. Clara Mayfield entered with her usual briskness, a stack of reports under one arm. She wore her duty uniform, but her sleeves were rolled halfway, revealing faint freckles along her forearms. Her expression, always controlled, softened when she spoke. Valor made it through the night. He's weak but responsive. He even tried to stand when I checked in earlier. Nathaniel exhaled in relief. Clara set the reports down on his desk, her green eyes steady. But there's something else. While I was reorganizing the evidence room, he reacted to a satchel we stored years ago. Barked low, the kind of bark that says he remembers. Nathaniel frowned. What satchel? Clara guided him to the evidence locker. Inside, behind rows of old boxes, lay a worn canvas satchel, its leather strap cracked with age. The tag read, Case 117C, a narcotics bust from 2 years prior, the same year Valor vanished. Clara lifted it carefully, dust motes swirling in the beam of light. He wouldn't stop staring at this, almost growled. Nathaniel took it, his gloved hand brushing the faint, acrid scent that clung to it, like chemical residue mixed with sweat. He unbuckled it. Inside were scraps, a torn map, a metal ID plate, and a roll of black tape. The plate caught his attention. It was stamped with numbers, partially scratched away. But he recognized the shape. It had once been attached to a K9 collar. His chest tightened. Before he could speak, a knock came at the open doorway. Emily stood there, her sketchbook hugged tight to her chest. Her long brown hair fell over one eye, and she shifted nervously from foot to foot. "Uncle Nate," she said softly, "there's someone outside." Nathaniel rose at once, following her to the front steps of the substation. On the cracked sidewalk stood a boy, no older than 14, thin as a reed with black hair matted against his forehead, and clothes that hung loose as if borrowed from older hands. His jeans were torn at the knees, his sneakers frayed, and his jacket, army green, too large for his small frame, looked like it had been slept in for weeks. His skin was tanned and dusty, his eyes a deep brown, clouded by exhaustion, but still alert, watching every move around him like a cornered animal. Nathaniel stepped forward cautiously. "Son, you lost?" The boy shook his head, clutching the straps of his jacket tighter. His voice was hoarse, unused. "My name's Luis Ramirez." His accent carried the cadence of border towns, soft yet edged with fear. I heard you found a dog." His gaze flicked past Nathaniel, toward the station, then back, wary. Clara, appearing behind Nathaniel, studied the boy carefully. "Why does that matter to you?" Luis hesitated before blurting out, "Because I've seen dogs like him before. My father, they made him work with them. He hated it, but they said if he refused, they'd kill us." Nathaniel's pulse quickened. He motioned Luis inside, away from the street where passersby might overhear. In the office, the boy stood hunched, unwilling to sit until Emily placed a chair near him. She whispered, "It's okay." And for a moment, his rigid stance softened. Nathaniel leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "Tell me about your father." Luis swallowed hard. His name was Mateo Ramirez. He worked odd jobs, fixing cars mostly. Then men came, black SUVs, no plates. They told him to carry packages across the border, tires, crates, sometimes animals. They made him cut dogs open and sew things inside. He hated it, said every night it killed him. Last year he tried to walk away. They shot him in the back. Luis's hands trembled as he gripped the chair. "I ran. Been hiding since." Emily's eyes widened, her fingers gripping her sketchbook tighter. She knew what it meant to lose a father, suddenly. Her gaze met Nathaniel's, silently pleading for him to listen. Clara crouched near Luis, her voice gentler than usual. "And now you think they're here again?" Luis nodded quickly. "I saw them last night, near the outskirts, same SUVs, same men. They dropped something under a tree." His eyes darted to Nathaniel. "That's where you found the shepherd, isn't it?" Nathaniel's throat tightened. He exchanged a glance with Clara. The boy knew too much for coincidence. Valor barked faintly from the kennel room, a weak sound but insistent. Luis startled, turning toward it. "That bark," he whispered. "I remember it. One of the nights, they kept him. I heard him cry." His eyes filled with something between horror and relief. "He survived." Nathaniel placed a hand on the desk, steadying himself. This child, ragged and trembling, was not just a witness, but a survivor of the same darkness that had stolen Valor. He wanted to promise safety, but promises in Red Hollow were heavy things. Emily stepped forward before Nathaniel could speak. "You can stay here," she told Luis firmly, her voice stronger than he had ever heard from her. "You don't have to hide outside anymore." Her gray-blue eyes met Nathaniel's, as if daring him to contradict her. For the first time in weeks, Nathaniel felt something stir, a faint warmth cutting through the grim weight. Of duty. Emily was right. Perhaps sheltering the boy was dangerous, but leaving him to the streets was worse. He nodded slowly. "You'll stay here tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Luis let out a shaky breath, almost a sob disguised as relief. He sat finally, shoulders slumping. Emily quietly slid her sketchbook toward him, open to a half-drawn picture of Valor. Luis studied it, then whispered, "You drew him good." Emily's lips lifted in a faint smile, the smallest but most genuine one Nathaniel had seen on her face in months. Outside, the desert wind rose, carrying with it the dust of old secrets. Nathaniel knew the shadows of the past were walking again in Red Hollow, and now they had names, faces, and a boy who held pieces of the truth. The evening air settled heavy over Red Hollow, the desert turning violet as the sun sank behind the mesas. Nathaniel Cross stood on the back porch of his home, an old cedar frame house on the outskirts of town. The boards creaked beneath his boots, weathered by years of storms. Inside, the faint sound of Emily's voice drifted through as she spoke quietly to Luis, the boy still shy, still afraid, but slowly thawing under her presence. Nathaniel had let him stay the night, though it went against every protocol in the book. Yet rules meant little when weighed against the terror in a boy's eyes. Valor lay nearby on the porch, stretched across an old quilt Emily had insisted on bringing out. His fur was cleaner now, brushed of the worst filth, though scars carved deep along his ribs and across his chest. He was 7 years old, once strong and majestic, now lean with hardship. But even resting, he carried the presence of a guardian. His folded left ear twitched at every sound, his nose flaring at the scent of dust carried on the wind. Nathaniel knelt beside him, rubbing gently behind the scarred ear. "You remember, don't you? You're not done yet." Valor's tail brushed the wood once in answer. Inside the kitchen, Clara Mayfield leaned against the counter, sipping burnt coffee from one of Nathaniel's chipped mugs. Her uniform shirt was gone, replaced by a plain gray sweatshirt and jeans, a rare sight out of duty. She was off shift, but had insisted on staying, claiming she wanted to help keep watch. Truth was, Clara had seen too many cases go bad when victims thought they were safe. She carried her own scars of vigilance. Ever since the injury 2 years ago, she rarely allowed herself to relax, as though the world might punish her again if she did. Luis sat at the table, hands clasped tight, his face pale beneath the dim light. Emily perched across from him, sketchbook still within reach. She asked questions in her cautious but curious way, not like a detective, but like someone trying to understand. "What did they look like?" she asked softly. Luis glanced at Nathaniel, who gave a nod of encouragement. The boy swallowed. "They wear the same, dark clothes, vests, gloves, even when it's hot. The SUVs are black, no plates. My dad said they were part of something bigger, not just one group but tied to others across the border. He said if you saw their leader, you'd know by the way he moved, like he owned everything around him." His hands clenched tighter. "They call him El Cuervo." The crow Clara set her mug down. "You've seen him?" Luis shook his head quickly. "Number, but my father did. Said his eyes were cold, black like stones." His voice broke slightly. "The night before my father died, he said, 'If I disappear, protect your mother and run.' He never came home." Nathaniel felt his chest tighten. He had heard stories of El Cuervo whispered in law enforcement briefings. One of those names that floated just outside reach, the kind you never saw on paper, but everyone feared. Now, in Red Hollow, it seemed less like rumor and more like a shadow creeping closer. Emily reached across the table, her small hand resting over Luis's clenched fists. Her gray-blue eyes softened. "You're safe here now," she said. For a moment, Luis let out a shaky breath, as though her words built a fragile shelter around him. The peace fractured when a knock echoed against the front door. It was sharp, deliberate, not the kind of knock belonging to a neighbor. Nathaniel's hand went instantly to the revolver at his hip. Clara moved silently to the window, peeling the curtain just enough to see. A truck idled in the dirt road, an older model, but in good shape, its headlights dimmed. The man at the door was not cartel, his clothes too ordinary, his posture too casual. Clara gestured to Nathaniel, who cracked the door cautiously. The visitor tipped his hat, revealing a face worn by sun and time. He was Reverend Amos Keller, the local pastor of Red Hollow's small church. Amos was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered despite the stoop in his back. His dark hair was streaked with silver, and his skin bore deep lines from both desert sun and sorrow carried quietly. His eyes, however, were warm hazel, often described as eyes that could coax confessions. He wore a plain black coat and carried a leather Bible pressed to his chest. Known for compassion, Amos had nonetheless faced his own demons. His wife had died of illness a decade earlier, leaving him to raise a daughter alone, and that grief gave him a gravity others felt in his sermons. "Evening, Sheriff," Amos said gently. "Word travels quick in this town. I heard about the shepherd." His gaze flicked past Nathaniel, softening at the sight of valor lying inside. "I thought maybe you could use some prayers." Nathaniel nodded warily, letting him step inside. Amos greeted Emily with a smile and nodded respectfully toward Luis. The boy stiffened at the sight of a stranger, but Emily whispered, "It's okay, he's kind," and Luis eased just slightly. Amos knelt by Valor, laying a calloused hand near his fur without touching until the dog sniffed and allowed it. His voice lowered in reverence. "Even the fiercest warriors can be broken, but what matters is they still rise." He looked up at Nathaniel. "That dog carries something. You'll need to be ready." Clara, never one for sermons, nonetheless respected the man. "Reverend, you notice anything unusual lately? Any strangers around?" Amos frowned. 2 nights ago, I saw a pair of cars parked near the cemetery. No plates, men standing by them, not locals. I thought they were grieving late. Now." He let the words trail off, the implication heavy. Nathaniel thanked him, promising to follow up. Amos stood, tucking his Bible under his arm. Before leaving, he said softly, "Sheriff, don't carry all the weight yourself. Even the strongest men need others to stand with them." His gaze lingered on Clara, then Emily, then Louise, before he stepped back into the night. When the door shut, silence fell heavy. Clara broke it first. "They're circling closer. We can't wait for them to make the next move." Nathaniel nodded. He looked at Luis. "You're sure you want to keep talking?" Luis lifted his chin, still fragile but braver now. "If I don't, then my father died for nothing." Valor stirred on the quilt, his ears twitching at the word father. Emily knelt beside him, brushing her hair back. "Then we'll help," she whispered, as if speaking to both boy and dog. Outside, the desert wind kicked up, scattering grit against the windows. Nathaniel felt the weight of what lay ahead pressing in, darker than the night sky. The past had not only returned, it had found their doorstep. The desert evening gave way to a restless night in Red Hollow, the kind where every gust of wind against the eaves sounded like a whisper of warning. Nathaniel Cross sat at his kitchen table, his badge set aside, the weight of responsibility pressing heavier than the revolver on his belt. Clara Mayfield remained in the living room, perched in a chair by the window, eyes scanning the dark horizon. Emily had fallen asleep against the old couch with Valor curled protectively beside her, while Luis sat cross-legged on the rug, too nervous to close his eyes. The boy had not known safety in a long time, and even now his shoulders twitched at every sound. It was close to midnight when the silence broke. The crunch of tires on gravel drifted through the night. Nathaniel's head lifted, his body taut. Clara was already on her feet, hand near the pistol at her side. "That's not a neighbor," she murmured. The headlights that followed were muted, low beams barely cutting the dark. A black SUV rolled slowly up the dirt path, followed by another. Both stopped at the edge of Nathaniel's yard. "Stay inside," Nathaniel ordered sharply to Emily and Luis. Emily's gray-blue eyes widened with fear, but she nodded, clutching Valor's fur. The shepherd, though weakened, rose on shaky legs, his hackles rising as a low growl rumbled from his chest. He was no longer the broken animal they had found. He was again the guardian. 3 men stepped out of the vehicles. The first was broad and heavy-set, mid-40s, with a thick beard and shaved head. His leather jacket gleamed under the porch light, and his posture radiated arrogance. This was Ralph Danner, a known enforcer in the region, a man rumored to have worked with various cartels as muscle for hire. His reputation was built on brutality. Scars across his knuckles spoke of fights he started and finished. His eyes were cold, the kind that weighed a man not for worth, but for weakness. The second man was leaner, younger, with a restless energy that betrayed impatience. Mick Holloway, late 20s, jittery eyes, hair shaved close to his scalp. His mouth twitched in half smirks, as though violence amused him. Locals whispered that Mick had once been a small-time meth cook who graduated to something darker when he fell in with bigger predators. The third figure lingered at the back, tall and silent, a shadow in a dark hooded sweatshirt. His face was narrow, almost skeletal, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that burned with watchful calculation. He did not speak, but his silence was more dangerous than the other's swagger. Ralph stepped forward onto the porch, boots heavy against the wood. He knocked, not timidly, but with the back of his fist, 3 booming thuds that made Emily flinch inside. Nathaniel opened the door only partway, revolver tucked low at his side. "Evening," Ralph said with a grin that held no warmth. "We're here for what belongs to us." "You're trespassing," Nathaniel answered, voice steady as stone. Ralph chuckled. "You found something under a tree, a dog. That dog's ours. Hand him over and we'll be on our way." Before Nathaniel could respond, a sharp bark split the air. Valor shoved forward, planting himself at the doorway, lips peeled back to bare his teeth. His growl was deep, raw, the sound of memory and rage. Ralph's smile faded. So it's true. He lived. Clara stepped into the frame beside Nathaniel, her green eyes burning. "You're not getting him back." Her hand hovered close to her holster. Mick sneered from the yard. "Lady, you don't know who you're dealing with." The silent man behind them shifted, his gaze locking onto the window where Luis peeked out. His lips curled faintly, and in that moment, Nathaniel knew. The boy was their other target. The tension snapped when Ralph reached for his coat. Nathaniel swung the door wide and raised his revolver. "Step back now," he commanded. The men hesitated, caught between threat and bravado. Mick muttered something under his breath and took one step too far. That was when Valor lunged. The German shepherd exploded forward past Nathaniel's leg, his body a streak of sable fur and scars. He slammed into Ralph's arm, teeth clamping down with the fury of 2 lost years. Ralph roared in pain, staggering back as blood darkened his sleeve. Mick pulled a knife, rushing toward the porch, but Clara was faster. She drew and fired a warning shot into the dirt at his feet. The crack echoed across the desert night, sending birds screaming into the air. Inside, Emily screamed, clutching Luis's arm. "Stay back!" she begged, trying to pull him deeper into the house. The boy froze, terror dragging him to the floor. Ralph swung wildly, trying to shake Valor off. The shepherd held firm, growling savagely, his jaws locked like iron. Nathaniel moved quickly, kicking Ralph's leg out from under him, sending the heavy man crashing into the dirt. Mick cursed, dropping his knife, as Clara pressed her pistol against his chest, forcing him to his knees. The silent one had not moved until now. He suddenly bolted toward the side of the house, but Nathaniel caught his motion and fired a shot past his shoulder, driving him down into the yard. The chaos ended almost as quickly as it had begun. Ralph writhed on the ground, clutching his bleeding arm, Valor standing above him with bared teeth, chest heaving. Mick trembled under Clara's gun, eyes darting wildly. The third man lay face down, hands raised, realizing silence would not shield him tonight. Nathaniel stood over them, his breath heavy, the revolver steady in his grip. "You picked the wrong house," he said coldly. Behind him, Emily emerged, pale but unbroken, her hand still clutching Luis's. Valor limped slightly as he returned to Nathaniel's side, but his eyes gleamed with pride, his tail giving the faintest wag. Emily knelt and hugged the shepherd, tears streaking her cheeks. "He saved us," she whispered. Clara zip-tied the men one by one, her movements sharp and efficient. Nathaniel kept his revolver trained until they were secured. The yard was littered with dirt, blood, and the echoes of violence, but his home still stood, and more importantly, so did his family. Nathaniel looked at Luis, who stared wide-eyed at Valor. The boy's voice shook but carried awe. "He fought for you, for all of us." Nathaniel rested a hand on Valor's back, feeling the tremble of muscles still coiled with adrenaline. "That's what he was born to do," he said softly, "and I'll make sure he never fights alone again." The desert wind swept across the porch, tugging at the blood-stained boards, carrying the scent of battle into the night. The shadows had come to their doorstep, but they had been pushed back, for now. The men captured on Nathaniel's porch were locked away in the holding cells of the Red Hollow substation by dawn. The desert outside was bathed in harsh gold light, the sun stripping away the night's shadows, but leaving the tension behind. Clara Mayfield paced the narrow corridor, her uniform wrinkled from lack of sleep, green eyes sharp and unyielding. Nathaniel sat at his desk, shoulders bowed under exhaustion, his revolver dismantled and cleaned before him. The ritual as much about calming his nerves as maintaining the weapon. Emily and Luis were in the back room with Valor, the dog resting on a blanket. Though wounded from the fight, Valor remained alert, ears twitching, gaze locked toward the cells, as if he could sense the danger that lingered. It was then that a new figure arrived, stepping through the station doors with measured confidence. Special Agent Dean Whitlock of the FBI introduced himself with a handshake firm as iron. Dean was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with short dark hair streaked faintly with silver, his jawline square and marked with faint stubble. His gray eyes were steady and assessing, the kind that missed little. His black suit was dusted at the cuffs from travel, the tie slightly loosened, giving the impression of a man who worked long hours in unforgiving places. Known among his peers for patience mixed with persistence, Dean had built his career investigating cartel networks across state lines. He had lost a younger brother years ago to an overdose, a wound that never healed but became the fuel for his relentless pursuit of those responsible. "Sheriff Cross," Dean greeted, his voice carrying quiet authority. "I got your call about the shepherd. Thought it was rumor until I saw the case file. Now I see it's real." His eyes softened briefly when he glanced through the glass window at Valor. "That dog surviving is a miracle, And maybe leverage. Nathaniel shook his hand, his voice rough from the long night. Leverage? Dean nodded, setting a leather satchel on the desk. He unzipped it, laying out documents and photographs. We've tracked the movements of Miguel El Cuervo Herrera for years. He runs routes across this desert, trafficking drugs, weapons, sometimes worse. Your shepherd? He tapped a photo of a scarred German shepherd lying under surgical lights. They used him. We believe they thought he was finished, left him behind like a message. But if word spreads that he lived, the cartel won't ignore it. They'll fear what else survived, what evidence. Clara leaned closer, her freckles standing out under the harsh light. You're suggesting we use Valor as bait. Dean's eyes met hers without flinching. I'm suggesting we create the appearance that he still carries something valuable. Smugglers think in terms of assets and losses. If they believe the dog has contraband stitched inside him, they'll move to reclaim him, and when they do, we'll be waiting. Emily, who had slipped quietly from the back room, stiffened at those words. Her gray-blue eyes flashed with defiance as she clutched her sketchbook tightly. You can't put him in danger again. He's been through enough. Her voice trembled but carried unusual strength. Dean turned toward her, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. I promise you, young lady, we're not going to hurt him. It's all smoke and mirrors. We'll make them believe he's carrying something. But Valor will never leave this station unprotected. Nathaniel rested a hand on Emily's shoulder. We won't let them take him. Not again. Emily nodded, though her eyes lingered on Dean with distrust. Luis, who had been hovering near the doorway, stepped forward. His dark hair hung into his eyes, his oversized jacket too heavy for his frail frame. They'll come, he said quietly. They always come for what they think belongs to them, and they'll bring more than the ones you caught last night. His voice shook, but he lifted his chin bravely. I can help. I know some of their habits, where they park, how they watch. Dean studied him carefully. You were with them? Luis's jaw tightened. They made my father work. I heard things. I saw things. I know the smell of their cigars, the way they always send one man ahead to check for traps. He swallowed hard. I don't want anyone else to end up like him. Nathaniel felt the boy's pain as though it were his own. You've done enough, Luis, he said gently. But Clara interjected, her tone softer than usual. Maybe his details can give us an edge. Doesn't mean he goes into the field, but knowledge saves lives. Dean agreed. We'll take what he knows, build a trap with precision. He laid out a map of the desert on the desk, tapping several circled locations. We believe Herrera has safe houses out there. If Valor's survival is leaked to the right ears, they'll move, and when they do, we'll find the trail of ashes they've left behind. The plan unfolded slowly, measured with caution. They would allow whispers to slip, suggesting Valor still had something inside him, contraband left unrecovered. They would stage movements, patrols that made it appear the dog was under guard but vulnerable enough to tempt retrieval. In truth, Valor would never be alone. Dean promised a full federal team stationed discreetly nearby. Later that night, when the station had grown quiet, Emily sat with Valor in the kennel, her hand tracing the scar along his ribs. Luis sat nearby, sketching clumsily in her notebook under her encouragement. His hands were unsteady, but he drew a rough version of a black SUV with shadowy figures. Emily laughed softly, the sound light in the heavy air. For a moment, Nathaniel, watching from the doorway, saw something unfamiliar on his niece's face, joy. Clara joined him at the door, her voice low. She's opening up, Nate. That boy, he's giving her someone to care for besides herself. Nathaniel's gaze drifted back to Valor, who lifted his head, eyes glinting in the dim light, as though he understood the role thrust upon him. He's carried too much already, Nathaniel murmured. But maybe this time we can carry it with him. The desert wind whistled outside, carrying grit against the glass. The game had shifted. They were no longer reacting. They were preparing. The trail of ashes was in sight, and they were about to follow it. The night in Red Hollow stretched long, the desert painted in iron gray under a half-moon that clung to the sky. Nathaniel Cross drove his cruiser across the cracked highway, leading toward the outskirts where abandoned freight warehouses stood like skeletal monuments of a forgotten economy. The plan Dean Whitlock had devised was simple but dangerous. make the cartel believe Valor carried contraband still hidden inside his battered body, then draw them out where the FBI could strike. Yet Nathaniel knew men like Miguel El Cuervo Herrera never walked into traps blindly. They came armed with shadows to spare. Inside the cruiser, Clara Mayfield sat stiff in the passenger seat, her hand never far from her sidearm. Her green eyes scanned the desert, reflecting the headlights that bounced off rusted fences. "You really trust Dean's plan?" she asked. Nathaniel gripped the wheel, his jaw tense. "I trust that we're running out of choices." Behind them, in an unmarked SUV, Dean Whitlock led a small tactical unit, 4 agents in tactical gear, each faceless behind helmets but trained for this sort of ambush. Dean himself wore a vest over his suit, the blend of authority and readiness that defined him. His eyes never stopped moving, studying the shadows, reading the land like scripture. Emily and Luis had been left in town, under the care of Reverend Amos Keller, whose church basement served as a safe shelter. Emily had protested bitterly, insisting she should be near Valor, but Nathaniel had stood firm. Now, as the cruiser slowed to a stop near the looming shape of a warehouse with a sagging corrugated roof, Nathaniel glanced at the back seat where Valor sat. The shepherd was more alert than in days past, his ears perked though one remained bent, his amber eyes catching the faintest glimmer of light. The scars along his ribs stood out stark against his sable coat, but he radiated something deeper than strength. Resolve. Nathaniel whispered, "Stay close, boy. Not tonight." The warehouse, once marked Sage Freight and Company, had long since collapsed into disrepair. Its faded red letters peeled under the moonlight, the windows shattered, the loading docks littered with rusted pallets. The desert wind whistled through the holes in the metal walls, a hollow, mournful song. Nathaniel, Clara, and Dean moved inside first, their boots crunching over glass and sand. They were not alone long. The distant hum of engines grew louder, headlights blinking against the horizon. 3 black SUVs rolled into the yard, their movements sharp, rehearsed, like predators circling prey. They cut their engines simultaneously, and silence fell heavier than before. From the lead vehicle stepped a man who seemed to draw the darkness with him. Miguel El Cuervo Herrera was in his 40s, tall and lean, with sharp features that looked carved from stone. His black hair was slicked back, his mustache trimmed thin, and his eyes, obsidian dark, carried no warmth, only cold calculation. He wore a tailored black jacket despite the desert heat, its cut immaculate, and polished boots that clicked against the cracked asphalt. He moved with an unsettling grace, like a crow hopping from shadow to shadow, every step measured. Those who knew him whispered of his cruelty, how he once punished betrayal by burying men alive in the desert. His very presence silenced his crew. Behind him came 6 men, armed, their weapons held casually but ready. One was Diego Rojas, stocky with a crooked nose, broken long ago in prison brawls, tattoos crawling up his thick arms like vines. Another was Salvador Cruz, wiry and quick, his skin weathered by years under the sun, a jagged scar cutting from his lip to his chin. Each of them carried their own brand of menace, bound together by fear of the man leading them. Dean signaled his team to hold position, spread across the catwalks above, weapons trained. Nathaniel and Clara stood near Valor, who bristled, growling low. Miguel's lips curved into a faint smile as he approached. "Sheriff Cross," he said in accented English, smooth and deliberate. "I've heard of you, a man of order in a place ruled by dust. And you—" his gaze slid to Valor. "You've cost me more than once. Amazing what refuses to die." Nathaniel's revolver never wavered. "He's not yours. He never was." Miguel tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Everything has an owner, Sheriff. Even loyalty can be bought. That dog carried my merchandise across borders. That boy you're hiding, Luis, his father bled for me. And when people forget who commands, I remind them." His voice was calm, but beneath it hissed the venom of threat. Clara stepped forward, her tone sharp. "This ends tonight, Herrera. You're outnumbered." Miguel laughed softly, raising one hand. "Outnumbered? I've walked into worse odds. The difference is, I walk out." The standoff snapped when Diego raised his rifle, firing a warning burst into the rafters. The FBI team returned fire instantly, the warehouse erupting into chaos. Sparks rained as bullets ricocheted off steel beams, the air thick with gunpowder. Nathaniel pulled Valor back, shielding him behind a crate, while Clara fired toward the advancing men. Dean's voice barked orders above, precise and commanding. Miguel moved through the storm with eerie calm, firing only once but with deadly accuracy, dropping an agent on the catwalk. His men spread wide, forcing Clara and Nathaniel deeper into cover. Valor barked furiously, lunging forward despite Nathaniel's grip, his teeth bared at the sight of the cartel leader. As bullets shredded the air, Clara stumbled, a graze marking her arm. She bit down a cry, still firing. Nathaniel hauled her behind another crate, his jaw clenched. "You good?" She nodded through gritted teeth. "Just a scratch. Keep focus." Dean took a position on the mezzanine, rifle braced, his eyes fixed on Miguel. He muttered into his radio, directing agents to flank. "Don't let him slip," he ordered, but Miguel seemed almost untouchable, weaving through shadows, his men falling around him, but his presence unshaken. Amid the chaos, Valor broke free. The shepherd bounded forward, dodging debris, and lunged at Salvador Cruz just as the man raised his weapon toward Clara. The impact was brutal, Valor's jaws clamping onto his arm, dragging him down. Salvador screamed, the rifle clattering away. Clara took the chance, firing a clean shot that disabled another attacker. Miguel's gaze flicked toward Valor, and for the first time, a crack appeared in his mask. "That dog!" he hissed, almost to himself. Nathaniel used the distraction, stepping from cover with revolver raised. His shot grazed Miguel's shoulder, spinning him slightly. Miguel did not cry out. He only smiled, dark and thin. "Sheriff," he said, retreating into shadow, "you've declared war." The gunfire dwindled as cartel men fell or fled. The FBI agents pressed forward, securing the wounded, shouts echoing. When silence finally returned, the warehouse floor was littered with shell casings, blood, and broken glass. Clara sat against a crate, her arm bandaged quickly by another agent, sweat streaking her face. Nathaniel knelt beside Valor, who panted heavily, a cut marking his leg, but his eyes still burning bright. "You saved her," Nathaniel whispered, running a hand along his scarred back. Dean approached, face grim. "We took down most of his men, but Herrera slipped through. He won't run far, though. Not after tonight. He'll come back harder." Nathaniel looked around the shattered warehouse, his revolver still warm in his grip. Emily's face flashed in his mind, Luis's frightened eyes. The war had come, and now there was no turning back. The desert did not sleep after the battle at the warehouse. Rumors spread through Red Hollow faster than the dust storms. Whispers that Miguel El Cuervo Herrera had been wounded but not broken. Nathaniel Cross knew better than to rest. He doubled patrols, kept Emily and Luis close, and never allowed Valor far from his side. Yet even as he sat at his desk reviewing reports, the silence between walls carried a pressure that felt like waiting for thunder. At Reverend Amos Keller's church basement, Emily and Luis sat together most afternoons. The church itself was a weather-beaten structure of white clapboard, its steeple leaning slightly from decades of storms. But inside, it smelled faintly of candle wax and cedar. Amos often stayed nearby, though quietly, as if sensing the children needed space. Emily would draw in her sketchbook, and Luis, still adjusting to the strange safety, would sit cross-legged, telling her fragments of memories, the sound of his father's laughter, the taste of roasted corn, the nights hiding when engines roared outside. These exchanges carved trust between them, and though fear lingered, so did something like hope. That evening, Clara Mayfield arrived at the church. She had bandages wrapped around her arm from the warehouse fight, though she wore them without complaint. Her strawberry blonde hair was pulled back, her eyes alert, even as exhaustion shadowed them. Clara crouched to Emily's level. "Your uncle asked me to keep watch here tonight. Just routine." Emily nodded, though her expression betrayed unease. Luis sat closer to her, as though proximity to Emily granted him courage. The night grew heavy, the desert wind howling against stained glass. Valor, lying on a rug near the pews, stirred suddenly, his ears twitching, body rigid. Nathaniel, outside speaking with Amos, caught the change instantly. He stepped back into the sanctuary just as the front doors creaked under pressure from the wind, or so it first seemed. Then came the knock. Sharp, calculated. The doors burst open before anyone could answer. Shadows poured in. 3 armed men, their faces obscured by bandanas, weapons glinting under candlelight. At their center stepped Miguel Herrera. His black jacket was torn at the shoulder, where Nathaniel's bullet had grazed him, but he carried himself with the same unsettling calm. His slicked hair shone under the dim light, his dark eyes colder than stone. He raised one hand as if commanding silence in a church that was already breathless. "Family," Miguel said softly, his accent coiling around the word. "I've come to collect what belongs to me." His gaze landed on Emily, and his smile was cruel. "The sheriff's blood, carried in small form. She will do nicely." Emily's breath hitched. She pressed against the pew, clutching Luis's hand. Valor growled so deeply it rattled the air, his scarred frame quivering with restrained violence. Nathaniel stepped forward, revolver drawn, his voice steel. "You won't touch her." Miguel's laugh was low, mocking. "You think bullets will save you? I could kill you now, Sheriff, but where's the lesson in that? No, I will take your heart instead." He gestured, and one of his men moved toward Emily. Luis did not think, he acted. With a burst of reckless bravery, he yanked a broken hymnboard from the wall and swung it at the advancing man. The wood cracked against the attacker's shoulder, sending him stumbling. "Run, Emily!" Luis shouted, his voice breaking with both fear and resolve. The sanctuary erupted. Nathaniel fired, the shot echoing off stained glass as Miguel dove for cover. Clara pulled her weapon with her good arm, sending bullets toward the other 2 men. Valor leapt like lightning, his body slamming into the man Luis had struck, jaws clamping onto his arm. The man screamed, the rifle clattering away. Emily scrambled toward the altar, tears streaming, but Miguel lunged, grabbing her wrist. For a heartbeat, it seemed the nightmare would triumph. Then Luis hurled himself between them, shoving Miguel back with all the strength of desperation. The cartel leader staggered a step, eyes widening in shock more than pain. Valor seized the moment, his teeth sinking into Miguel's jacket, tearing fabric, dragging him backward. Nathaniel advanced, revolver steady, fury burning through his voice. "Let her go!" Miguel swung a knife from his belt, slashing at Valor, the blade grazing the shepherd's flank. Valor yelped, but did not release, his jaws locked in defiance. Clara fired again, the bullet grazing Miguel's boot, forcing him to retreat toward the door. He hissed, his obsidian eyes locking onto Nathaniel. "This is not the end, Sheriff. This is the beginning." With a signal, the remaining men dragged him out, firing wild shots to cover their retreat. The doors slammed behind them, leaving silence broken only by Valor's heavy panting and Emily's sobs. Nathaniel rushed to her, wrapping her in his arms, his chest heaving. Luis collapsed against the pew, trembling, his courage spent. Clara leaned against the wall, reloading with shaking hands, her bandaged arm bleeding anew. Valor limped back to Nathaniel's side, his fur darkened by a shallow cut. But his eyes gleamed with feral pride. Emily threw her arms around his neck, whispering through tears, "You saved me." Nathaniel met Clara's gaze. They both knew the truth. Miguel would return, fiercer than before. But in that church, amid broken wood and blood, they had survived. And in Luis's reckless bravery, Nathaniel saw the spark of a boy willing to fight for something larger than his own fear. Outside, the desert wind carried Miguel's promise into the night. Not the end, but the storm yet to come. The sun climbed slowly over Red Hollow the next morning, flooding the town square with a honey-colored light that softened the scars of the night before. The church still bore the marks of battle, splintered pews, shattered glass, streaks of dried blood near the altar. But inside, Emily sat with Valor's head resting across her lap, her fingers stroking the scar along his ribs. Luis sat close by, his oversized jacket folded beside him, his face pale with exhaustion, but bright with pride. Nathaniel Cross leaned against the doorframe, watching the children, the weight in his chest tempered by a rare peace. By mid-morning, federal reinforcements arrived, summoned by Agent Dean Whitlock after Miguel's brazen assault. Trucks and armored vehicles rolled into the square, scattering dust, while agents swept through alleys and back roads, securing perimeters. Dean, wearing his vest over his rumpled suit, spoke quietly with Nathaniel outside the substation. His gray eyes were sharp, yet fatigue shadowed his face. Herrera won't retreat far. Men like him don't vanish. They dig in. We traced one of his runners this morning. He's hiding in a canyon out east. Nathaniel's revolver rested heavy on his belt. Then we finish it. Dean nodded. We finish it. By afternoon, the desert once again became a battlefield. The FBI convoy rumbled toward the canyon, accompanied by Nathaniel and Clara in the lead cruiser. Emily and Luis were left under Amos Keller's watchful care, though Emily clung to her uncle's sleeve before he departed, her gray-blue eyes fierce. "Promise me you'll come back," she whispered. Nathaniel bent low, pressing a kiss to her forehead, his voice steady though his heart quaked. "Always." The canyon was a scar in the earth, narrow walls of red stone rising on either side. Hidden within, Miguel Herrera's men had fortified a rusted trailer compound, its corrugated walls bristling with armed guards. Miguel himself stood at the center, his black jacket replaced by desert fatigues, his wounded shoulder bound but not slowing his movements. His eyes burned like coals as the convoy approached. The battle was swift and brutal. Gunfire cracked through the canyon, bullets sparking against rock. FBI agents surged forward, tactical precision forcing cartel men into retreat. Clara, still bandaged, fought at Nathaniel's side, her green eyes blazing with determination. Dean moved like a commander in war, directing squads with calm authority. Amid the chaos, Valor darted through smoke and dust, his body low, muscles taut despite the limp in his leg. He lunged at Diego Rojas, dragging the scarred enforcer to the ground before the man could fire on Clara. Miguel fought with desperate fury, his knife flashing in the sunlight, his voice a hiss of rage. "You should have left me in the shadows, Sheriff," he shouted, slashing at Nathaniel in close quarters. Nathaniel blocked with his forearm, the blade grazing his sleeve, and answered with a punch that sent Miguel staggering. Valor struck next, teeth tearing into Miguel's arm, forcing him down. Dean's agents swarmed, disarming the last of the cartel fighters. When the dust cleared, Miguel Herrera knelt in the dirt, bound in steel cuffs, his obsidian eyes still cold, but his empire broken. Dean stood over him, voice low but resolute. "For every life you destroyed, you'll answer." Miguel sneered, but his silence was no longer power. It was defeat. Back in Red Hollow, the town gathered days later in the square for something it had not known in years: celebration. A wooden platform was erected near the courthouse, draped with flags. Townsfolk, ranchers in dust-stained hats, shopkeepers in Sunday clothes, children clutching parents' hands, filled the square. They had lived too long in fear of shadows, and now they came to honor those who had pushed them back. Nathaniel stood in his crispest uniform, his badge polished to gleam in the sun. Beside him, Valor walked with a proud, limping gait, his scars visible but his head high, a faint bandage still wrapped around one flank. Emily stood nearby in a simple blue dress, her hair brushed neatly, her gray-blue eyes radiant with pride. Luis, in clean clothes donated by Amos, stood a step behind her, shoulders straighter than before, no longer the boy hiding in shadows, but one who had stood in defiance. On stage, Dean Whitlock addressed the crowd, his deep voice carried across the square. This town faced darkness. Families were torn apart. Children lived in fear. But through loyalty, courage, and sacrifice, we fought back. And at the center of that fight was not just lawmen or agents, but a shepherd, scarred, loyal, unyielding. He gestured toward Valor, whose ears perked at the sound of his name. In recognition of service and loyalty beyond duty, the Department of Justice honors him. Dean knelt, opening a small velvet box. Inside gleamed a golden medallion engraved with a K9 paw and the words, "For loyalty beyond duty." He fastened it gently around Valor's neck, and the crowd erupted in applause. Children clapped, ranchers raised hats, and Emily wiped tears from her cheeks as she whispered, "That's our hero." Luis, standing beside her, smiled wide, his dark eyes shining. Reverend Amos Keller led a prayer afterward, his baritone voice reverent. This medal is not only for the shepherd, but for what he represents: courage when fear seemed greater, light when darkness seemed endless, and family when hope seemed lost. That evening, when the square emptied and the banners fluttered in the fading light, Nathaniel walked with Emily, Louise, and Valor to the quiet field behind Town Hall. Wildflowers dotted the fence line, late bloomers stretching through desert soil. Nathaniel crouched beside Valor, running his hand down the shepherd's scarred back. "We're not done, you and me," he said softly. Valor let out a contented sigh and leaned against him. Emily knelt beside them, looping her arms around Valor's neck, while Louise stood with a faint smile, holding a sketch of the moment he had drawn hastily during the ceremony. For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt the desert not as a burden, but as home. They had faced fire, and through loyalty, they had found something stronger: family. In the end, this story reminds us that even in the darkest valleys, God's hand is never far away. A wounded dog returned, a broken family found hope again, and what looked like loss was turned into a miracle of loyalty and love. In our daily lives, we may face struggles that feel too heavy to carry, but just like Nathaniel, Emily, Louise, and Valor, we are never truly alone. God places light in unexpected places, sometimes through people, sometimes through faithful companions, and always through His grace. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others can feel that same reminder of hope. Leave a comment below, tell us what it meant to you, and if you believe in God's miracles, type Amen in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe for more stories of faith and courage, and may the Lord bless you and keep you safe today and always.